Tariffs are central to US economic and foreign policy in the new Trump administration. The reverberations of his supporters' cheers are matched only by the shudders of apprehension globally. So what's in store for the US and the world? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Tom McRae. One of the best-selling books of all time is a business guide called How to Win Friends and Influence People. How to Lose Friends and Influence People might perhaps describe US President Donald Trump's current approach to international trade. His speech to both houses of Congress to set out his plans, with tariffs central to his policies, was met with roars of approval like those at a rally. There was a very different response, however, from stock markets and world leaders. From Europe to China, they've reacted with a mix of despair and defiance, some responding with their own trade taxes. So what do Trump's economic plans mean for the US and its trading partners, both near and far? And what might the impact be for the rest of us around the world? We'll ask our panel for their views in just a few moments. But first, this report from Wilson Dizzard.
President Donald Trump's speech to Congress brought the House down.
And by the way, we're going to have growth.
But critics at home and abroad fear the U.S. and global economy could go in the same direction if he goes all in on his campaign promise to raise tariffs with major trading partners.
We have been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth, and we will not let that happen any longer.
What Trump calls his America First policy envisions forcing companies to base manufacturing in the U.S., creating more jobs. Democrats say his plans are disastrous and will both hurt Americans and kill economic growth.
His tariffs on allies like Canada will raise prices on energy, lumber, and cars, and start a trade war that will hurt manufacturing and farmers. And if he's not careful, he could walk us right into a recession.
Just a day after his speech, President Trump began reversing some of his trade levies, giving major car manufacturers a 1-month reprieve. The U.S. auto industry is reliant on parts from factories in Mexico and Canada. Reports suggest a rethink on tariffs on some agricultural products could also be in the pipeline. But the diplomatic damage was already done. Europe and China said they were preparing retaliatory measures.
The first tariffs have been imposed on a large scale, not only against Europe on aluminium and steel. If these are confirmed, Europeans will respond and there will be reciprocal tariffs, because we need to protect and to defend ourselves.
China is also preparing for a trade war with a stimulus plan for affected industries.
Internationally, the external environment is becoming more complex and challenging, which may have a greater impact on China's trade, technology, and other sectors. The rise of unilateralism and protectionism is further disrupting global economic circulation.
Mexico said it would expand its trade relationship with other countries.
If needed, we'll look for commercial partners, anything to protect Mexico and Mexicans within the framework of sovereignty and dignity.
Although most economists say tariffs will raise prices, President Trump is betting they won't. But it's a big gamble, with high stakes, not just in the U.S., but around the world. Wilson Dizzard, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's take a closer look at the tariffs and why President Trump wants them. The US buys more than it sells from its trade partners. Last year, there was a trade deficit of $1 trillion. The US imported goods worth $4 trillion, while exports amounted to just over $3 trillion. Trump wants to reverse that by imposing a 25% tax on goods from Mexico and Canada and 20% on goods from China. Some of those measures took effect on Tuesday. Now, companies in the US that rely on products from abroad will have to raise prices, which will affect American consumers. Trump and his supporters say the higher prices will be temporary because more foreign businesses will relocate to the United States. Well, let's bring in our guest now. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Niall Stanage, a White House columnist for The Hill newspaper. In New York is Dimitris Valatsas, the chief economist and founding partner of Aurora Macro Strategies, an advisory firm that focuses on geopolitics and macro economies. And in Henderson, Nevada, is William Lee, chief economist at the American non-profit think tank, the Milken Institute. Thank you very much for joining us all here on Inside Story. Niall, if I can begin with you straight away. Apart from being an extremely long speech, what did you make of Donald Trump, and what do you think the main message was that he was trying to get across? How effective do you think he was?
So in terms of the speech, this is what Donald Trump does, which is give speeches that tend to appeal to his base. He tends to not really bother with such an appeal to the centre ground. And we saw that in the concentration on immigration, for example, on so-called culture war issues, on issues around diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives, to which he is extremely opposed. Now, I think the two big substantive topics in the speech were Ukraine on one hand and the tariffs on the other, and we didn't get an enormous amount of clarity on either, backing off some of his hostility toward Vladimir Zelensky, but still being unclear as to the path forward. And when it comes to tariffs, talking about the idea that there would be some level of interruption, but oh well, we can live with it.
Okay, we're going to focus today not so much on Ukraine, but on obviously the economic parts of his speech. Dimitris, from an economic point of view then, can you just explain his plan? Like, what is he actually trying to do with these tariffs, with this trade war that he seemingly is intent on carrying out?
Well, Tom, I'm not sure anyone in the administration is able to explain Donald Trump's overall economic plan. There are different flanks of it, and the speech, as you mentioned, was addressed to Congress, and there are some things that absolutely need to go through Congress. I don't think I would change our outlook on fiscal policy following the speech. We saw a lot of what was on the campaign trail, a promise not to tax tip workers, a promise not to tax overtime, a promise not to tax Social Security payments. Now, all these things need to go through Congress, and the Republicans have a very slim majority there. So it's a difficult task. I wouldn't really, by paying more attention to it, isn't going to make it more likely that Congress will be able to pass what are, after all, very expensive measures. So, in regard to the setting, I would pay attention to the fiscal stuff. On trade policy, as you mentioned, the president is not really going to Congress to ask for authorization to impose tariffs. He's doing it by executive authority. He's created a lot of uncertainty. And some of the goals, such as bringing manufacturing back to the United States, are actually hampered by the administration's other policies, such as on immigration, which will create a worker shortage. So it's very hard to find a coherent narrative to say this is what the administration is driving toward. And I think that's what's worrying markets as well.
William, I see you're shaking your head there. What were you disagreeing with that Dimitris was saying?
I'm very surprised to hear what Dimitris says, because the one thing that President Trump has been very clear about all through his campaign and even from his first administration is that he likes the use of tariffs, because tariffs are one of many policy tools to achieve a set of economic and non-economic objectives. And I think he's been crystal clear that tariffs are used to try to encourage the development of strategic industries in the United States, and they're superior to subsidies that many countries use. And in fact, they're superior to the subsidies that the Biden administration used, like the CHIPS Act, because subsidies cost the budget money. It costs revenues. Tariffs bring in revenues, and it provides the same amount of protection. And as far as the global engagement is concerned, President Trump, the first speech he made, especially to the executives at Davos, was to say the United States is open to investment from the rest of the world. You come and be a partner with us, and you benefit from reduced taxes and a tariff barrier that protects the production that you set up in the United States. But if you choose to be a competitor, then you will face a tariff barrier because you choose not to invest in the United States. So this really is a very clear corollary to the Make America Great agenda, which is to maximize domestic employment and domestic incomes. So the fact that there's uncertainty talked about, I can't imagine any CEO that hasn't put in contingencies the minute Donald Trump was elected. tariffs are going to be part of the landscape, and what do we do to re-optimize our production? That's the discussion at every boardroom that I have ever talked with, and any executive that was surprised by tariffs, they should have the bonus withheld.
Yeah. Niall, I guess William touched on this a little bit with what he was saying there. I mean, Trump's claimed that he has popular opinion at his back, saying that Americans have given us a mandate for bold and profound change. He's basically promised to do these things when he was running. Now he's following through on those promises. So should everyone have been aware of that this is exactly what Trump and how he was going to act? Niall?
I think there are two separate strands to that question. One is, should people be aware that this is what Donald Trump believes? Yes, certainly. These are things that he said on the campaign trail. Now, you then quoted the thing about him having the broad mandate. It is true that he won in the Electoral College in November by a moderately comfortable margin. It's also true that he won the popular vote by 1.5 percentage points. Does that qualify as a mandate for the enormous kind of changes that he is proposing across the board? There's very considerable difference in public opinion in terms of, say, immigration, where he does have widespread support for a much more restrictionist policy, and other topics like tariffs, where opinion is much more split. The role of Elon Musk, where opinion is extremely split. So I think we need to be cautious about saying he has this broad, sweeping mandate for everything.
OK. Dimitris, I mean, Trump said it is much better to deal with the US as a partner rather than a competitor. But is he basically burning all of his closest partners and allies in the first month or so of his second term?
I think so, and that's why I'm a little baffled by the use of tariffs. Not because we weren't warned. Of course, we were warned. Trump, his entire career, has spent, talking about tariffs and thinking about tariffs as tools to achieve various objectives. But I'm not entirely sure I understand, William, how national security will be helped by imposing tariffs on Canada, by stoking anti-American sentiment in our closest ally. I'm not sure I understand how real incomes are going to be helped by making products abroad and at home more expensive. This is what tariffs do. And I'm not entirely sure how the current account deficit is going to be helped by importing more FDI, which counts as negative on the current account. So, all these things we've been warned about, they're being implemented in a completely haphazard fashion. We saw tariffs being imposed on Canada, then delayed, then autos might be exempt. Then today we're hearing maybe food might be exempt, and maybe these companies will be exempt or not. And this is not a stable environment. What we're hearing from corporates is not, now is a great time to go and invest a lot of money in the United States. It is, how do we supply Canada out of non-U.S. producing facilities to avoid the tariffs? And I think this is the kind of rearrangement you're likely to see, so long as tariffs are not, say, implemented by Congress with a degree of certainty that they're going to be there for the long run, but rather implemented by executive authority on today, off tomorrow.
OK, William, I want you to respond to this. As we heard there, tariffs could probably rattle supply chains, strain some of the US's most important diplomatic relationships, which we've seen already, and could very likely add significant costs for American consumers as well as manufacturers. So can you explain, what is the upside here? What is the upside that Donald Trump is going to have to sell to the American people?
Let's remember what tariffs are. They raise the price of imports relative to domestically produced products. So it's a relative price shift. And it encourages people to spend their money on domestically produced products rather than imported products. So that's the purpose of a tariff, right? Is to switch expenditures. And the fact that we place tariffs on our big trading partners, Canada and Mexico, Trump was very clear in explaining it's to shut off the invasion from the south of illegal immigrants and illicit drugs. And so the purpose of the tariffs on Canada was really to achieve a non-economic goal, which is to shut down illegal immigration and illicit drug importation. And as far as our encouragement of investments are concerned, that's the one thing that is very good for the United States. It's very good for the world, because the United States has been the place for the highest rates of return on investment. There's something economists call the Lucas effect, the Lucas paradox. And Robert Lucas, the Nobel laureate from the University of Chicago, quite a while ago discovered that capital actually flowed from emerging markets into developed markets like the United States, because that's where returns are the highest. And the one thing that President Trump is trying to encourage is to remind everybody that your investment in the United States, producing in the United States, will be a source of high returns and will not only benefit Americans, but will also benefit the rest of the world, because we then create a marketplace where your investment dollars can be the most productive. So I think the fact that our partners are right now reacting to the tariffs is because we're trying to level the playing field. We're trying to take away the unfairness of specific taxes on American products like automobiles and cars. And yes, the average tariff between developed countries is pretty low, but we're not talking about average tariffs. President Trump is really trying to target tariffs to achieve very specific shifts in strategic industries that will benefit the rest of the world by reallocating resources to better strategic partners. And in terms of our supply chains are concerned, the one thing we learned from COVID was we cannot have one single source for important products like pharmaceuticals. And so reshifting relative prices is a way of reshifting and duplicating supply chains so that we have security in our supply going forward.
Okay, but on all of this...
Can I just break in for one moment here? Because please. I'm really curious about some of the observations made by our friend from the Milken Institute there. He's arguing that tariffs should be used for policy goals, and he cited the example of Canada with illegal immigration and illicit drug use. Now, about 1% of fentanyl in the United States is attributable to movement across the northern border. It is also a much more minor component where immigration is concerned. Does he, as an economist, believe that 25% tariffs on Canada are a proportionate response to 1% of fentanyl coming across that border?
William?
The amount of fentanyl that comes across from Canada, people say is like, about 50 pounds or so. That's enough to kill several million people. Fentanyl is a very potent drug. And actually, this is really to get our borders secure.
1% of the total.
We're talking about deaths of American citizens, and President Trump is trying to.
Yeah, but are you not representing a free market? You're representing a free market organization, as I understand, purporting to propose a protectionist policy that will impede a considerable amount of cross-border trade for a very minor effect on the overall problem that you're purporting to address.
The fact that you focus on Canada shows that you really are missing the point here. President Trump's policies is to try to effect changes in the system that has not been able to be done before because of too many vested interests. And if you look at the overall package, we focus on tariffs, but remember, President Trump's package is to reduce the size of government, deregulate the economy, and encourage foreign investments in the United States. And
because you're defending tariffs on the point that they have this effect on illicit drugs and immigration, neither of which are a major issue in relation to the northern border. It's you who's focusing on tariffs, and then when you're called on it, you're trying to divert into other areas.
Can we focus on the rest of the tariff package and rather than just looking at Canada? Because yes, Canada and the U.S. have got other issues to work out. And I agree with you. There's a lot of political stuff behind that. The Trudeau government is in big trouble right now. And right now they're trying their best to have some kind of national agenda against the United States to try to rev up his political position.
But Canada is also the largest, the strongest ally of America. So it is obviously very pertinent to this conversation that Trump would single out the closest ally to the US. Dimitris, I want to come to you. The Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that tariffs will lead to higher prices on certain products for a short period of time. I mean, how long can that be sustained before there is significant pushback from the American people?
I think that's a political question, and it is up to the American people, of course, to if they want to vote for tariffs and higher prices, then they'll do that. But I'm not entirely sure that's what they were after. It would be very dangerous for any economist or politician coming out the inflation cycle we've just seen all around the world. I'll remind you, we were hitting 7% inflation. Only 3 years ago, that people were dismissing as transitory and it's this one-off shock and it's just COVID and don't worry about it. I think it would be very dangerous for economists or for politicians to say, oh, this is just a one-off. In fact, if we look at consumer surveys that have come this year, what consumers are worried about are considerably higher inflation expectations. And this is a big problem for monetary policy, and this is a big problem for all the laudable things that the Trump administration is trying to achieve. They're not going to be able to achieve them if they cause significant concern among consumers straight out of the gate by implementing tariffs that I think we can all agree are targeted at pretty much any random policy objective that comes up on the president's agenda.
Well, William, obviously another big part of this is the stock market, and there is a concern there just around the amount of uncertainty that has already shrouded Trump's first month or so in power. I mean, he sees the stock market as a barometer of his success, really. So what happens if it does keep falling, and how far will he allow that to happen before he has to act?
Let's remember the volatility in the stock market has been going on for just about the last month or so. But the stock market itself is really at its historic highs. And as far as the uncertainty is concerned, and inflation was mentioned, and let me put that to rest again. Relative price changes, that's what tariffs do. They change relative prices, not absolute prices. When things become more expensive, you spend less money on those things and more money on other things. The overall spending still stays the same because that's constrained by your domestic income, your family income. So in terms of taxes, tariffs being inflationary, again, that's a misnomer. Some prices are higher, other prices become lower. When you cut back on expenditures, those prices cannot be sustained, and any businessman worth his salt will lower the prices to keep his market share. So let's basic economics 101. Tariffs are not inflationary. They raise some prices, they lower other prices. So again, it's a relative price change, not an inflation issue.
Dimitris?
I just think that's flat out wrong. I mean, we're about to impose a 10% tax on Canadian oil. That's going to show up at the pump. Can you explain to me how this sales tax on gasoline prices is going to raise American real incomes? And what are people going to spend their money on that's going to be cheaper when gas prices are more expensive?
When gas prices are more expensive, people will consume less gasoline, or producers will produce more gasoline based on American oil. And in terms of the overall expenditures, the prices that become relatively cheaper are the ones that are produced in the United States. The United States is a relatively closed economy. Trade itself is about exports and imports about 15% each of total GDP. So in terms of the overall impact on prices, when we saw President Trump's first administration and the tariffs that went in there, the CPI went up by a 0.25 percentage point over 2 years, hardly noticeable. So we have not seen any experience at all anywhere around the world where tariffs themselves cause inflation. Monetary policy going berserk causes inflation. And fiscal spending going berserk, as Biden did, causes inflation. Inflation expectations went up because of administered prices, insurance prices, car mechanics, a lot of things that are not anything to do with imports at all.
Yeah. OK, we need to broaden this out a little bit more because obviously all of this impacts the rest of the world. Niall, the Chinese embassy tweeted out of the US, basically said that if war is what the US wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. I mean, what can be made of that from a political point of view when a power such as China basically comes out fighting with fighting words like that?
I think it's ominous. I don't think that it necessarily means that China and the United States are about to fight a shooting war or anything like that, but it is obviously ominous, and it obviously speaks to a ratcheting up of international tensions. Now, President Trump would argue that his tariffs have on occasions been used to try to elicit policy gains from other countries. I don't dispute that at all. But if you take the view that the freest possible trade is overall a net good thing for the United States, then obviously this is not a good thing. The possibility of a trade war is one of the things that is spooking the markets at the moment. And that, if that continues, if that uncertainty continues, if those tensions continue to ratchet up, then obviously that's a problem.
Dimitris, what can a lot of these other countries actually do from here? Is there any way for them to unify and actually maybe increase trade between one another and cut the United States out if possible?
I think so. I mean, and I agree with what William said. The United States is a large, closed economy. Trade as a percent of our GDP here is actually not that high. Other countries have much higher trade flows. And of course, in economic modeling, we expect them to trade more with each other and less with the United States as a consequence of raising tariff barriers between the U.S. and the rest of the world. So my expectation would be, and we saw a little bit of that, European manufacturers, European multinationals saying we're switching production for Canadian consumption from the U.S. to the EU, where it's not going to face tariffs. So I think you can confidently expect some compensating effects. Of course, it's not going to completely make up for the loss of consumer surplus that we're going to see by imposing those tariffs and the counter tariffs that all the other countries will impose on the United States as a consequence. But it will be a mitigating effect for net exporters like the EU or China.
William, there's also obviously, as well as any economic impact, there's going to be a diplomatic fallout as well, as we've seen with some of America's closest allies. How do you factor that into what could potentially happen in the next 3 to 6 months?
What I anticipate the political reaction is going to be is that they will come to the bargaining table, probably in groups, small groups, or bilaterally, and arrange free trade agreements with the United States and say, look, let us together level the playing field between one or two countries or a set of countries. The one thing that President Trump wants to avoid are these large multilateral trade agreements that take a long time to put together, take a long time to change and adapt to circumstances as they do change. And so free trade agreements and more bilateral agreements with the United States are certainly in the future, and especially investment deals. To get around the tariff barrier that President Trump is putting up, he's going to say, bring your money here and let's talk deals. And I think you're going to see much more in the way of bilateral and regional engagement with the United States, with the rest of the world. And that'll be the benefit to everybody.
Niall, I want to finish with you. A lot of his Donald Trump supporters say that his behaviour is intended to be unpredictable, that there's this sort of chaos, this deliberate chaos around him to put people off balance. Do you think that he is playing 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers, or do you think he's making it up as he goes along?
On this tariffs issue, I think he's making it up as he goes along, because I am not convinced he really understands the fundamentals of how tariffs work. And I think he also underestimates the time it will take for manufacturing to move in a significant way into the United States in a revitalized way, if that's his actual goal. There will be enormous turbulence before that point is arrived at. Yes, some companies, are making plans to have a plant or two move here. But the kind of widespread revitalization of American manufacturing is extremely difficult to accomplish. And if you're trying to accomplish it through tariffs, you're going to risk serious inflationary factors and just widespread disruption.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, but no doubt whatever happens next is going to be unpredictable. I'm pretty sure of that. Niall, Dimitris and William, thank you so much for joining us here on Inside Story. We really do appreciate it. Well, thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Tom McRae, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.